"We have to make cuts," they said, walking me out with a severance check that didn't even hit 4 figures. 3 years of my life, gone without a thank you. I wrote the licensing clause that saved them from bankruptcy, but they conveniently forgot my name was still on it. When they tried to sell the company for millions, they didn't realize my signature was the only thing standing between them and their fortune. My name is Claire Donahue, and my professional life was pronounced dead at 7:42 on a Friday morning. The air outside held the crisp, indifferent chill of early autumn, the kind that promises change whether you're ready for it or not. I wasn't. The glass doors of the Evermore Licensing Solutions building slid open with a familiar, sterile hiss, and I stepped into the lobby, the scent of industrial-strength cleaner and brewing coffee filling the air. It was a smell I associated with 3 years of my life: early mornings, late nights, and the relentless, grinding pursuit of keeping this company afloat. A company I had, in no small part, saved. I walked toward the security turnstile, my keycard in hand. It was a simple, thoughtless motion, one I'd performed thousands of times. I held the plastic card to the reader. Instead of the permissive, friendly green beep that granted me passage, the machine emitted a short, sharp, accusatory buzz. A single, blood-red light blinked back at me. Denial. I tried again. Beep, red, a security guard, a man whose children's names I knew, looked up from his crossword puzzle, his expression a careful mixture of pity and professional distance. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That was the first sign. "Ms. Donahue," he said, his voice low. "They asked for you in HR, 7th floor." The elevator ride was silent, the mirrored walls reflecting a woman I barely recognized. Her shoulders were tense, her jaw set. I smoothed down the front of my blazer, a nervous gesture. The 7th floor was a quiet, carpeted morgue of corporate procedure. The Human Resources Department was an open-plan space designed to look collaborative and friendly, but it always felt like a waiting room for an executioner. Today, that feeling was suffocatingly real. The space was unnaturally quiet. The usual hum of quiet conversation was gone, replaced by the gurgling death rattle of a Keurig machine in the corner, brewing a single cup of coffee for someone who was not me. A junior HR administrator, a young woman I'd personally onboarded 6 months ago, was staring intently at her monitor, her fingers frozen over the keyboard. She knew. They all knew. No one looked at me. Denise Calder was waiting in a glass-walled conference room. She was the new CEO, brought in by the venture capital firm that had taken a majority stake last year. She had dark brown hair cut in a severe, immaculate bob, and a smile that was engineered to be disarming but never quite reached her eyes. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and a graphite gray suit that cost more than my first car. She gestured for me to sit, her movements fluid and practiced. "Claire, thank you for coming in," she began, her voice a polished, melodic instrument that delivered devastating news with the same placid tone she might use to order a salad. She didn't offer me coffee. "We've been reviewing the company's strategic direction, and as part of our restructuring, we've made the difficult decision to eliminate certain roles. Unfortunately, your contract is no longer aligned with our future growth." The corporate jargon was a thick, cloying fog meant to obscure the simple, brutal truth. I was being fired. I looked past her, through the glass wall, at the city skyline. I had spent countless nights in this building, staring at that same view, fueled by caffeine and a misguided sense of loyalty, drafting the very legal architecture that made their future growth possible. Future growth. I asked. My voice came out colder and steadier than I expected. "What exactly does that mean? Does it mean jettisoning the person who wrote the single licensing clause that prevented this company from being carved up and sold for parts during the last acquisition attempt? The clause that generates 60% of our recurring revenue." For the first time, a flicker of something unsettled crossed her face. Her gaze shifted from my eyes to a point somewhere over my left shoulder. She was a predator, but she didn't like it when the prey stared back. "This was a collective decision, Claire," she said, the sweetness in her voice curdling slightly. "The board and the leadership team are in complete alignment. The company is moving in a more agile, tech-focused direction. She pushed a plain manila envelope across the polished mahogany table. It slid to a stop just in front of my hands. My severance. Through the thin paper, I could feel it contained only a few sheets of paper and a single, slim check. My laptop, she informed me, had already been remotely locked. My network access was terminated. When I was escorted back to my desk, a single, sad-looking cardboard box was already sitting on my chair. It wasn't even a new box. It was a repurposed one that had once held printer paper. The logo of the paper company still visible on its side. That small, thoughtless detail felt more insulting than the firing itself. I was a piece of trash being taken out in a used container. I packed my things in a daze, a framed photo of my sister and me, a worn copy of a contract law textbook, a coffee mug that said, "Litigate, caffeinate, dominate." It felt like a cruel joke now. The process took less than 5 minutes. My 3 years of 16-hour days, of canceled plans and sleepless nights, all condensed into a flimsy cardboard box. When I opened the envelope later, in the cold, impersonal silence of the elevator, the number on the check was a gut punch. It was an insultingly small amount, less than a single month's salary. I did the math in my head, a sick, automatic calculation. It was roughly 1/300th of the projected annual revenue from the software licensing agreement I had single-handedly structured and negotiated. They were paying me off with a rounding error from the very money I had made for them. The security guard from the lobby was tasked with escorting me out. As we walked past the reception desk, Denise appeared from the hallway, her practiced smile back in place. It was a final performance, a show for any employees who might be watching. "Claire," she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity, "we truly wish you the best. We hope you find great success on your new path." I didn't answer. I stopped and looked up at the wall behind the reception desk. Polished aluminum letters spelled out the company's name, Evermore. It was a name I used to believe in, a promise of permanence, of stability. Now, it was just a lie, a hollow, meaningless word. As the glass doors hissed shut behind me, leaving me on the cold pavement, the weight of the box in my arms felt immense. The humiliation was a physical thing, a cold stone in my stomach. They had taken my job, my access, my dignity. They thought they had left me with nothing, but as I shifted the box to get a better grip, my hand brushed against the inside pocket of my blazer. I felt the crisp, folded edges of a few sheets of paper. It was a copy, the original draft of the Evermore Master Licensing Clause, the one I printed out for my personal records right after the board ratified it 2 years ago, the one with my signature on the bottom line as the co-author and rights holder. In their rush to be agile and tech-focused, in their haste to erase me, they had forgotten the most important detail of all. They had forgotten the very foundation upon which their entire $19 million house of cards was built, and they had forgotten that my name was carved into the cornerstone. It feels like a lifetime ago, but it was only 2019. The world was different then. I was different. Evermore Licensing Solutions wasn't the sterile glass and steel cage I was ejected from. It was a dream housed in a glorified warehouse in South Austin, smelling of stale coffee, ambition, and the cheap laminate of IKEA desks. I was hired by the 2 founders, Ben Carter and Leo Finch, a pair of brilliant but legally naive coders who had built a revolutionary supply chain management software. They had the engine, but they had no idea how to build the car, let alone sell it with the right protections. They hired me as their first in-house legal counsel, their corporate shield. My starting salary was a joke, paid mostly in equity that was, at the time, worth less than the paper it was printed on. They were burning through seed money, and I was a gamble they hoped would pay off. They needed everything in corporation documents, employee contracts, terms of service, but most importantly, they needed a licensing agreement that was both flexible enough to attract their first big clients and ironclad enough to protect their singular, brilliant piece of intellectual property. This became my obsession. For 3 months, I didn't just work, I architected. I sat with Ben and Leo, learning the intricacies of their code, understanding not just what it did, but what it could become. I spent my nights poring over intellectual property case law, studying the ways small companies were devoured by larger ones, their innovations stripped for parts like a stolen car. I saw the loopholes, the traps, the cleverly worded clauses that amounted to corporate theft. From that crucible of caffeine and paranoia, the Evermore licensing clause was born. It was my masterpiece. It wasn't boilerplate legalese. It was a bespoke suit of armor tailored to their specific creation. It was elegant in its simplicity and brutal in its intent. At its heart was Section 4B, a single sentence that I rewrote 24 times until it was as pure and unbreakable as a diamond. Any sale, transfer, or assignment of the core source code and its associated intellectual property rights, in whole or in part, to a new controlling entity requires the explicit, written, and notarized consent of the original copyright co-author, Claire Donahue. There it was, my name, embedded in the company's DNA. When I presented it to Ben and Leo, they balked. Co-author Claire, we can't give you a piece of the IP. I laid it out for them. You can't afford to buy me out, I said, my voice calm and even. A full buyout of my contributions to this framework, both legal and structural, would cost you $250,000 you don't have. This, I tapped the document, costs you nothing. It aligns my interests perfectly with yours. My financial success is tied to your success, and it ensures that no one can ever take this company from you without my consent. Think of me as a third founder, but one who only votes on the single most important decision you'll ever make, who gets to own your life's work. They were smart enough to see the logic. They couldn't afford a watchdog, so they made the watchdog a part of the family. The contract was signed. I filed the copyright with the United States Patent and Trademark Office myself, listing Evermore Licensing Solutions, Inc., and Claire Donahue as co-authors. It was official. It was law. For 2 years, we thrived. We landed contracts. We grew. The warehouse gave way to a sleek downtown office with panoramic views. The IKEA desks were replaced with ergonomic workstations, and with that growth came the investors. Specifically, the Calder Group, a venture capital firm with a reputation for being aggressive, effective, and utterly ruthless. They saw our potential, and they injected the capital we needed to go from a promising startup to a major player. Their investment came with a condition: a Trojan horse named Denise Calder. She arrived like a perfectly tailored storm, all sharp angles, expensive perfume, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was introduced as a strategic partner from Calder, sent to optimize our growth trajectory. Ben and Leo were enamored. She spoke the language of valuations and scalability that they were still learning. She was everything they weren't: polished, politically savvy, and dripping with corporate confidence. I, however, saw her for what she was: a predator. Within 6 months, she had masterfully maneuvered her way into the COO position. Ben was nudged into a head of product role, and Leo was siloed as chief technology officer. They were founders in name only. Denise was running the company, and she did not like me. She saw me not as a shield, but as a roadblock. My cautious, protective legal advice was a friction against her move fast and break things ethos. The demotion came on a Tuesday morning at 10:30 a.m. It wasn't framed as a demotion. Of course, it was an exciting departmental restructuring. She called me into her new corner office, the one that used to be a collaborative space for the whole team. "Claire," she began, her voice a syrupy confection of false sincerity. "Your foundational work here has been invaluable, truly, but as we scale, our needs are evolving. We're moving away from a broad legal strategy role and focusing on tactical execution. I'm creating a new department, contract administration, and I want you to lead it." I kept my face a perfect, placid mask. "Contract administration," I repeated. "So, I'd be moving from chief legal counsel to a glorified paralegal." Her smile tightened. "I see it as specializing. You'll be ensuring the seamless execution of the agreements that drive our revenue. It's a vital, operational role. It was a cage, and we both knew it. She was taking me off the board, removing me from strategic conversations about the company's future, about potential mergers or acquisitions. She was putting me in a box where I could only shuffle the papers she allowed me to see. I had no choice but to accept. To refuse would be to resign, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. From that day on, I became a ghost in the machine I had helped build. I was a relic of the old Evermore. On the few occasions when strategic discussions did cross my desk, I would gently remind the new executives about the unique nature of our IP licensing. Just remember, I'd say in a meeting, that any potential acquisition would require my signature due to the co-authorship clause. Denise would offer a condescending little laugh. "Oh, Claire," she said once, in front of the entire executive team, still clinging to that old piece of paper. "We have a whole team of Calder's lawyers now. I think we're covered. Let's focus on the future, shall we?" Each time she did it, it was a small, public humiliation. She was erasing my history, my contribution. She was painting me as a small-minded bureaucrat, a footnote in a story she was now writing. I let her. I watched her arrogance grow, watered by success and the sycophantic agreement of her new hires. She and her team saw the clause not as a legal reality, but as a quaint artifact, a piece of startup folklore from a time before the adults were in the room. They never bothered to read the fine print because they couldn't conceive that someone like me could hold any real power over someone like them. I knew they would forget. It was inevitable. Hubris is a form of amnesia. They were so focused on the multi-million-dollar future they were building that they forgot the foundation on which it all stood. A foundation I had laid, with a single, unbreakable pillar holding the entire structure up. The day they fired me, as I walked out of that building with my pathetic severance check and a box of personal effects, I didn't feel rage or despair. I felt a cold, clarifying calm. The kind of calm a predator feels when its prey, after a long and tiresome chase, finally makes the fatal mistake. That evening, I didn't get drunk. I didn't call friends to cry or vent. I went home to my quiet apartment, made a cup of tea, and walked over to a gray 4-drawer metal filing cabinet in the corner of my home office. It was a relic from my first law firm, ugly and utilitarian. In the 3rd drawer down, in a folder simply labeled Evermore Originals, was a small, black USB flash drive. It wasn't encrypted with any fancy software. It didn't need to be. Its power wasn't in its secrecy, but in its authenticity. I slid it into the port on my laptop. The drive blinked to life. A single folder appeared on the screen. Inside was one file, Evermore Master Licensing Agreement Final USPTO, PDF. I opened it. The text was clean. The formatting perfect. I scrolled down to the signature page. There were Ben's and Leo's digital signatures, and there, right beside them, was mine, Claire Donahue. Beneath it, the cryptographic hash, the digital timestamp from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and the official registration number, irrefutable, unalterable, eternal. I looked at that signature, a ghost from a more hopeful past, a promise made and a right secured. Denise and her team of high-priced lawyers at Calder had copies of the agreement, of course, but they had the copies on their servers, digital files that could be dismissed as outdated versions, as drafts. I had the original, the source, the legally recognized genesis of their entire company's value, and they had just pushed the owner of that genesis out the door. I closed the file and stared at the blank screen for a long time. A single thought echoed in the silent apartment, clean and sharp as a shard of glass. If they were going to leave me with nothing, they were going to have to pay for everything. The month after my termination was a study in silence. The frantic rhythm of corporate life, the endless cascade of emails and meetings, was replaced by a quiet void. I spent my days in cafes, reading novels I'd meant to get to for years. I went for long, aimless walks through the city, reacquainting myself with a world that wasn't filtered through the tinted windows of a downtown office. I was living off my savings, a dwindling resource, but the peace was a currency all its own, I was letting the anger cool, letting it harden from a hot, messy rage into something cold, dense, and useful. I was waiting. I didn't know what for, precisely, but I knew my story with Evermore wasn't over. The universe abhors a vacuum, and corporate hubris abhors a loose end. The bomb didn't arrive with a bang, but with a ping. It was a Tuesday morning, just after 9. I was sitting at a small table in a local coffee shop, the air thick with the smell of roasting beans and steamed milk. My laptop was open, but I was just staring out the window, watching the city wake up. A notification slid onto my screen, an email. The subject line was bland. Corporate, an exciting new chapter for Evermore. It was from a generic Evermore Communications address. I almost deleted it. It was probably a mass marketing email, a digital ghost from my past employment. But morbid curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. My eyes scanned the boilerplate text, the effusive praise for the company's innovative spirit and market-leading solutions. Then, the payload, nestled in the second paragraph. We are thrilled to announce that Evermore Licensing Solutions has entered into a definitive agreement to be acquired by Calder Systems, a global leader in enterprise technology. The all-cash transaction is valued at approximately $19 million. $19 million. The number hung there in the air, shimmering with insult. The coffee in my mouth turned to ash. My entire world narrowed to the glowing screen, the clatter of the cafe fading into a dull roar. $19 million, built on the back of my work, my sleepless nights, my creation. And my cut was a severance check that wouldn't have covered 2 months' rent. I kept reading, my heart a cold, steady drum against my ribs. The email was a symphony of corporate self-congratulation, quoting Denise, quoting the CEO of Calder Systems, talking about synergy and future growth. And then I saw it, the final line before the sign-off. A legal declaration meant to be a tidy bow on the whole package. As part of this acquisition, all intellectual property, patents, and copyrights held by Evermore Licensing Solutions will be transferred in their entirety to Calder Systems. Transferred in their entirety. The words were a physical blow, a blatant, arrogant, and utterly foolish misstatement of fact. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had erased me from legal reality. They had looked at the bedrock of their company, the very clause that gave their product its legal standing, and decided it simply didn't exist because it was inconvenient. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold fury rising from my gut. It wasn't just greed. It was a staggering level of incompetence, a fatal dose of hubris. As if on cue, the muted television mounted on the cafe wall flickered to life with a story. It was CNBC, and there she was, Denise Calder, seated in a studio, looking radiant and powerful. The chyron beneath her read, Denise Calder, CEO of Evermore, on 19 Yada's acquisition. Her voice, smooth and polished, filled the cafe. This is a watershed moment for us, she was saying, her smile as bright and artificial as the studio lights. By integrating with Calder Systems, Evermore will be positioned to usher in a new era of automated licensing, creating seamless, end-to-end solutions for the global supply chain. I stared at her image on the screen, a ghost from my past celebrating a future she had stolen. A whisper escaped my lips, unheard by anyone but me, a small, definitive negation against her grand pronouncement. No, I breathed. No, you won't. I closed my laptop, paid for my coffee, and walked out into the crisp morning air. My mind a whirlwind of cold, clear thought. Back in my apartment, the first thing I did was power up my computer. I didn't search for news articles or press releases. I went directly to the source, the United States Patent and Trademark Office's public database. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in the registration number I knew by heart. I clicked search, the page loaded, and there it was, in the stark, undeniable black and white of a government server. Title of work: Evermore Supply Chain Management Software, Core Licensing Framework, copyright registration number TX 8918234. Authorship, Evermore Licensing Solutions, Inc., Claire Donahue. Date of creation, 2019. Status active. Co-author, Claire Donahue. They hadn't even bothered to file a fraudulent amendment. They just ignored it. They waved their hands and decided $19 million was enough to rewrite the law. I took a screenshot, saved it, printed it, and saved it again to 3 separate cloud services. It was my truth. It was their undoing. My hand was steady as I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my contacts, past the names of former colleagues and fair-weather friends, until I found the one I needed, Marcus Thorne. Marcus was an old-school IP lawyer, a shark in a bespoke suit who had left a big firm to start his own boutique practice. He had been my mentor years ago and had consulted with me when I first drafted the Evermore Clause. He understood not just the letter of the law, but the brutal poetry of its application. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. "Claire," he said, his voice a familiar, gravelly baritone. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you're already bored of retirement." "Not exactly." "Marcus," I said, my voice even. "I need your professional opinion on a hypothetical. Let's say a company's core intellectual property is co-authored, and let's say the licensing agreement explicitly states that any transfer of that IP requires the written consent of both authors." "Standard stuff," he said. "Sensible. What's the hypothetical?" "The hypothetical is that the company is trying to sell itself for $19 million and plans to transfer the IP in its entirety, without the consent, or even the knowledge, of one of the co-authors." There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant legal mind. When he spoke again, the amusement was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused tone of a predator that has caught a scent. "That's not a hypothetical, is it, Claire?" "No, it's not." "Evermore," he stated, not a question. "Evermore," I confirmed. I heard the sound of typing. "I'm looking at the press release now," he said. "Calder Systems, ambitious, and foolish. They're buying a house without checking the title. If they don't have your explicit written consent to transfer the copyright you co-own, then the central asset of this $19 million transaction is non-transferable. The entire sale is built on a fraudulent premise. It's not just invalid, it's a potential breach of contract with their buyer." The words were music. "So what you're saying is," I began, letting a small sliver of ice into my voice, "the deal is dead in the water, and they just don't know it yet." "I'm saying," Marcus corrected, "that you're holding the detonator to their $19 million bomb. The question is, do you want to press the button?" I thought of Denise's smug face on the television. I thought of the box on my desk, the condescending smiles, the casual erasure of my life's work. I looked down at my laptop screen, where the announcement email was still open. My eyes caught on a footer that had been automatically attached to the internal version of the email, a detail no one sending it to the press would have included. It was a standard IT department directive, a relic from an earlier data security policy I myself had helped write. "Note to all personnel. To ensure a clean transition, please delete all old drafts and superseded versions of company legal documents from local drives. Delete all old drafts. They weren't just ignoring the past. They were actively trying to scrub it from existence. They wanted to pretend my clause, my contribution, my very name, had never been there at all." A slow smile spread across my face. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a cartographer who knows she is the only one with the true map, while everyone else is about to sail off the edge of the world. "Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly calm, "let's draft a letter." I suggested we meet at the Daily Grind, a small, unassuming coffee house on Franklin Street, tucked between a dusty bookstore and a tailor's shop. It was a place of dark wood, worn leather chairs, and the quiet hum of conversations that mattered. It was Marcus's kind of place, no frills, no pretense, just quality. It was a world away from the gleaming, impersonal cafes where deals like Evermore's were celebrated. He was already there when I arrived at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sitting in a booth in the back corner, a cup of black coffee untouched before him. Marcus Thorne hadn't changed in the 5 years since I'd last seen him in person. He still wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit like a second skin. His salt and pepper hair was impeccably styled, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. He had the calm, predatory stillness of a patient hunter. He stood as I approached, shaking my hand firmly. "Claire," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You look like you're ready for a fight." "I am," I replied, sliding into the booth opposite him. "And I've come to my favorite weaponsmith for advice." A thin smile touched his lips. "Flattery. You must be in serious trouble. Or you're about to cause some, given the news. I'm betting on the latter." He gestured to my laptop bag. "Let's see the ordnance." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I took out my laptop, placed it on the table, and powered it on. The cafe was quiet enough that the soft click of the keys seemed to echo in the space. I navigated to the file, the official USPTO stamped PDF, and turned the screen toward him. He leaned forward, his eyes scanning the document he had once advised me on. He wasn't speed reading, he was absorbing it, his gaze lingering on Section 4B, the clause that bound my name to the company's soul. "It's just as I remember it," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "A beautiful piece of legal architecture, airtight." He pointed a manicured finger at the signature block at the end of the document. "And this is the original file from the registration." "The very same," I said, "pulled from a drive I haven't touched since 2019. I opened the file's metadata and the signature properties panel. Marcus leaned in closer, his lawyer's mind parsing the technical details. "Look at that," he said with genuine appreciation. "The timestamp is linked directly to the USPTO's server upon submission. The hash is clean. The cryptographic signature is validated against your key from that exact date. This isn't a document, Claire. This is a digital artifact, as solid and real as a signed piece of paper locked in a bank vault. We have an immutable clause here, certified by a federal agency." He leaned back, his eyes locking onto mine. "Immutable," he repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "It means it cannot be changed, cannot be argued away, cannot be superseded by later interpretations or corporate resolutions. They could have 100 board meetings and 1,000 signed affidavits from Denise Calder herself. None of it means a thing. This document, and the rights it enshrines, cannot be nullified unless you, Claire Donahue, affix a similarly verifiable signature to a document of consent, in writing." The clarity of it was bracing. It was exactly as I had designed it, but hearing it confirmed by a mind like Marcus's solidified my resolve. "That's what I thought," I said. "But I have to ask the obvious question. They've already announced the sale. The press release says they've entered into a definitive agreement. What if the money has already changed hands? What if they've already sold it?" Marcus took a slow sip of his coffee. He was in his element now. This wasn't just law. It was strategy, a complex game of chess, and he was seeing the whole board. "Then they've committed a monumental blunder," he said calmly. "Think of it this way. Evermore, in their agreement with Calder Systems, has made a promise. It's called a warranty of title. They have legally warranted, or guaranteed, to their buyer that they own the intellectual property free and clear and have the undisputed right to sell it. But they don't. You are a cloud on that title, a very, very big cloud." He continued, breaking it down for me, his tone that of a professor explaining a complex but elegant theorem. "The moment they signed that agreement with Calder, without your signature in hand, they breached their warranty. That's a lawsuit from their own buyer waiting to happen. More immediately, they have engaged in what's called a wrongful transfer of rights or conversion of intellectual property. They are attempting to sell something they do not fully own. It doesn't matter if the deal is pending or if they think it's already done. As long as you never gave your consent, the transfer of your ownership stake in that copyright is legally void." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "So the sale itself is an illegal act." "Precisely. It's a house of cards built on a missing foundation. All we have to do is show the buyer that the foundation isn't there." He paused, a glint in his eye. "Tell me for the record, Claire, did they ever, at any point, ask for your signature? Did they present you with a consent form, offer you a buyout for your stake?" I thought of Denise's condescending laugh, her dismissive words. Who cares about old history? "No, Marcus," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "They never asked. I never signed a thing." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Marcus's face. It was a terrifying and beautiful sight. He reached across the table and turned my laptop back towards him. "Well then," he said, the quiet satisfaction of a master strategist evident in his voice. "You're holding their noose, and they've willingly, happily, put their own heads through it." He cracked his knuckles, a theatrical gesture that meant he was ready to go to war. "Right, no more hypotheticals. Let's talk action." He opened his own slim laptop. "We're not going to sue, not yet. Suing is loud, slow, and expensive. We're going to do something much more effective. We're going to kill their deal with a single, perfectly aimed letter. We send it not to Evermore, they already know what they did. We send it directly to the general counsel of the acquirer, Calder Systems. We want to talk to the people with $19 million on the line." I watched as he began to type, his fingers moving with practiced speed. The words that appeared on his screen were a masterwork of legal lethality, polite, professional, and utterly devastating. He addressed it to Calder Systems' legal department, with a carbon copy directed to Denise Calder's office. He introduced himself. He stated his representation of me. He cited the copyright by its official registration number. He wrote, "It has come to our attention that your firm has entered into an agreement to acquire Evermore Licensing Solutions. This letter serves as formal notice that the central asset of this transaction, the intellectual property associated with the Evermore software, is co-owned by our client, Ms. Claire Donahue. Pursuant to Section 4B of the Master Licensing Agreement, a foundational corporate document, any and all transfers of said intellectual property require her explicit written consent. No such consent has been sought, nor has it been granted. Consequently, the announced acquisition constitutes a material infringement of our client's copyright and a wrongful conversion of her property rights. The warranty of title provided by Evermore is, therefore, invalid." It was perfect, clean, unambiguous. It was a legal bomb, and he had just pulled the pin. He was about to write the closing when I stopped him. "Wait," I said. "Let me add one last thing." He raised an eyebrow and turned the laptop back to me. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. I wanted a line that conveyed not just a legal position, but an intent, a threat that was both professionally sterile and deeply personal. I typed a single, final sentence below his paragraph. "This letter serves as a formal notice of potential infringement. All rights reserved. Further action is pending." Marcus read the line, then read it again, a slow nod of approval. "Pending action," he mused. "I like that. It's vague. It could mean anything. A lawsuit, an injunction, a public statement. You're not just telling them there's a problem. You're telling them a storm is coming. But you're not saying when or where it will hit. It's psychological." "She tried to erase me," I said quietly, looking at the screen. "I want her to spend the next few days wondering exactly how I'm going to rewrite her ending." He smiled that thin, dangerous smile again. "Consider it sent." He hit the button, and I watched the email disappear into the digital ether, an arrow loosed in the quiet of a coffee shop, aimed directly at the heart of a $19 million deal. The counterattack had begun. The email from Marcus had a subject line that was both understated and earth-shattering, "Arrow loosed." The body simply contained the sent receipt of our letter to Calder Systems, time-stamped at 3:52 p.m. I closed my laptop and did something I hadn't done in years. I did nothing. I sat on my sofa as the afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't read a book. I just sat and listened to the silence. the quiet hum of the city, a distant counterpoint to the storm I had just unleashed. I was coiling the spring. Now, all I had to do was wait for the recoil. It took 58 minutes. My phone buzzed on the coffee table, an email notification. The sender's name made my heart give a single, hard thump. Denise Calder. The subject line was a masterpiece of false nonchalance, catching up. It wasn't from her corporate account. It was from a personal Gmail address. A clear attempt to keep this off official servers, to frame it as a chat between old colleagues. The email itself was brief. Hi Claire, it's been a while. I was sorry to hear about your departure and hope you're doing well. It seems there may be a small administrative misunderstanding regarding some of the legacy legal documents. I'm sure it's just a matter of some old paperwork that needs updating. Can we find a time to talk tomorrow? Just the two of us, and clear this up. A small administrative misunderstanding, legacy documents, old paperwork. She was trying to shrink my claim, to frame my foundational legal work as a dusty file forgotten in a cabinet. She wanted to handle me, to use that syrupy, condescending tone to smooth over a crack that was about to shatter her entire world. She was offering me a conversation. I would offer her a brick wall. I waited 10 minutes, a small act of psychological warfare, before I replied. My response was even briefer than hers. It was addressed to her official Evermore email address, deliberately rejecting her private channel. Denise, all future communications on this matter should be directed to my legal counsel, Marcus Thorne, who has been copied on this email. We can certainly arrange a conversation, but it will be between our respective legal teams. Regards, Claire Donahue. I hit send. The trap was set. By copying Marcus, I had officially moved her small misunderstanding into the realm of a formal legal dispute. Her attempt to handle this quietly had just failed. The next email arrived 2 hours later. This time, it was from a name I hadn't expected to see: Alan Joyce, the chief financial officer of Evermore. He was a numbers man, a creature of spreadsheets and bottom lines, brought in by Denise to make the company look attractive for acquisition. His tone was devoid of Denise's false warmth. It was the cold, hard language of transactional problem-solving. Ms. Donahue, we are in receipt of a letter from your counsel, forwarded to us by Calder Systems. It is the position of Evermore Licensing Solutions that this is a minor clerical issue stemming from outdated documentation. However, in the interest of expediting the successful completion of our acquisition, we are prepared to enter into negotiations for a settlement to have your name formally removed from the copyright in question. Please have your counsel provide us with a term sheet for our consideration. They still didn't get it. They thought this was a holdup. They thought I was a toll booth operator on their highway to $19 million. They saw my name not as a fundamental right of authorship, but as a pesky line of text that needed to be deleted, and they were asking me to name my price for the delete key. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Mr. Joyce, let me be perfectly clear. I have no interest in having my name removed. I want it recognized. Regards, Claire Donahue. I sent it before I could second-guess myself. This was the moment of truth. I wasn't just a disgruntled ex-employee looking for a payout. I was the co-author of their success, and I was demanding my place in the story, not a check to disappear from it. Their response came back in under an hour. It was from a new address, a lawyer at a high-powered firm I recognized as the one Calder Group kept on retainer. The mask was fully off now. This was a formal offer. On behalf of Evermore Licensing Solutions, and without any admission of liability or wrongdoing, we are authorized to offer your client, Ms. Donahue, a one-time payment of $50,000 sounds, in exchange for a full and final release of all claims and the immediate signing of a quitclaim transferring all her rights, title, and interest in the intellectual property to Evermore. $50,000, less than 0.3% of the sale price. It was an insult wrapped in legalese. It was a nuisance fee. It was the number they thought my silence, my complicity, my entire professional contribution was worth. I read the email. I read it again. Then I closed my laptop. I made dinner. I watched a movie. I went to bed. I did not reply. Silence, I knew, would be a louder response than any counteroffer I could possibly make. Silence is a vacuum, and in a high-stakes negotiation, the other side will rush to fill that vacuum with their own worst fears. My silence wasn't a rejection. It was a judgment. It told them, "You are not serious. You do not understand the gravity of your situation. Come back when you do." The next day passed in a haze of tense anticipation. Nothing, no emails, no calls. The silence was now a two-way street. Then, at 4:45 p.m., an email from Marcus hit my inbox. The subject was a single word: checkmate. He had forwarded me an official notice from the legal department of Calder Systems, which had been sent to Evermore's counsel and copied to him. It was a short, brutally effective paragraph. Please be advised that Calder Systems is hereby invoking Section 7.1d of the Acquisition Agreement, which allows for the immediate and indefinite suspension of the closing of this transaction, pending the resolution of any material disputes concerning the warranty of title for key intellectual property. All due diligence and integration activities will be paused, effective immediately. They had hit the brakes. The $19 million train had screeched to a halt just before the station. The beautiful, seamless deal Denise had announced on national television was now officially in limbo. They were trapped. They couldn't move forward with the sale, and backing out would trigger massive penalties and make them look like fools to the market. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Claire, it's Sam from marketing. What the hell is going on?" They just pulled everyone into the main conference room, had lawyers on a speakerphone. "We all have to sign a new emergency non-disclosure agreement by the end of the day, or our access cards will be deactivated. People are freaking out. The Calder deal is on hold. Was this you?" The chaos had begun. The virus I had injected was spreading through their system, shutting down the central functions, causing panic and paranoia. I typed a simple reply. "I can't talk about it. Sam, good luck." I knew the final message would come from her. The corporate firewalls, the lawyers, the CFO, they were all just buffers. In the end, this was between me and Denise. It came not as an email, but as a text message to my personal phone. A raw, unfiltered burst of fury that must have bypassed all legal advice. It arrived at 7:17 p.m. "You are destroying everything. For what? Some petty revenge. You're not just sinking this company. You are burning your entire career to the ground. No one will ever hire you again after a stunt like this. You are making the biggest mistake of your life." There it was. The threat. The projection. Her world was crumbling because of her own arrogance, and she was trying to frame it as my self-destruction. The corporate CEO was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal, lashing out. I looked at her message, at the rage and fear bleeding through the screen. I felt nothing but a profound, cold calm. I typed my reply, a simple sentence of 7 words, the purest distillation of my entire purpose. "I'm not destroying it, Denise. I'm just taking back my share." I hit send. I watched the screen, saw the delivered receipt turn to read. I saw the 3 little dots appear, indicating she was typing a response. They appeared, vanished, then appeared again. She was starting, stopping, trying to formulate a reply to something so simple and so absolute. The dots danced for a full minute. And then, they disappeared. For the first time since I had met her, Denise Calder had absolutely nothing to say. There was only silence. And in that silence, I knew I had already won. Marcus did not believe in protracted sieges. He believed in swift, decisive strikes that decapitated the enemy's command structure. My silence had created a stalemate, a $19 million deal frozen in place. Calder Systems wouldn't move, and Evermore was hemorrhaging credibility with every passing hour. A lesser lawyer would have used this leverage to negotiate, to spend weeks trading offers and redline documents. Marcus saw it differently. "They're wounded, Claire," he told me over the phone the morning after Denise's final, unanswered text. It was 8 o'clock a.m. "They're bleeding in the water. and their buyer is circling. They think this is a negotiation about money. We need to reframe it as a hearing about a crime. We're not asking for a piece of the pie. We're going to get a federal body to declare that the pie itself is stolen. He didn't file a lawsuit. That was too slow. Instead, he filed an emergency petition with the Copyright Arbitration Royalty Board, an administrative body within the U.S. Copyright Office empowered to rule on disputes of authorship and licensing. He petitioned for an expedited declaratory judgment. It was an arcane but powerful tool. He wasn't asking for damages. He was simply asking a panel of federal judges to declare a simple fact that Claire Donahue was the legal co-author of the IP and that no sale could proceed without her consent. It was a move designed to force their hand, to drag them from the shadows of backroom deals into the harsh, unforgiving light of a formal hearing. The government, it turned out, moves surprisingly fast when a $19 million transaction is being held up by a potential federal crime. The notice arrived less than 24 hours later. A preliminary hearing was scheduled via secure video conference for 48 hours from then. We had our day in court, or rather, our 45 minutes on a glorified Zoom call with the power to vaporize a 9-figure deal. In that 48-hour window, I witnessed the full spectrum of their panic. The first move was a clumsy, desperate attempt at forgery. Marcus received an email from Evermore's counsel. Attached was a newly drafted document titled Retroactive Licensing Consent and Quitclaim Agreement. It was a work of fiction. It claimed that, as part of my original employment, I had agreed to transfer all rights upon termination, and this document was merely a formality to memorialize that pre-existing agreement. They had backdated the agreement date to the day of my hiring in 2019, but the digital signature on the document was Denise's, and it was time-stamped from the previous afternoon. It was the legal equivalent of a child trying to forge a permission slip in crayon. Marcus's reply was a model of contemptuous brevity. "We will see you at the hearing." The hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. I joined the video call from Marcus's conference room. The room was Spartan, a long mahogany table, 12 black leather chairs, and a massive wall-mounted screen. On that screen were the faces of our adversaries, neatly arranged in digital boxes like a high-stakes Brady Bunch. There was Denise, looking pale and drawn, her usual confident smirk replaced by a tight, brittle line. Beside her were 2 lawyers from the Calder Group's retained firm, both men with graying temples and expressions of profound irritation. Alan Joyce, the CFO, was in another box, constantly checking his phone, and in the center, presiding over it all, was a panel of 3 administrative law judges, their faces impassive, their virtual backgrounds the sterile seal of the U.S. Copyright Office. The air in Marcus's office was cold, the silence broken only by the quiet hum of the server rack in the closet. The lead judge, a woman with sharp features and rimless glasses named Judge Al-Hassani, began the proceedings without preamble. "This is a preliminary hearing on Petition 2023-74B, filed by counsel for Ms. Claire Donahue, seeking a declaratory judgment on the matter of authorship and transfer rights for U.S. Copyright Registration TX 8918234. Counsel for Evermore Licensing Solutions. You may begin." One of the gray-templed lawyers, a man named Peterson, cleared his throat. His voice was smooth, practiced, designed to soothe and deflect. "Thank you, Your Honor. This is, frankly, a straightforward matter that has been unnecessarily escalated. The petitioner, Ms. Donahue, is a former employee. Her claim is based on an early-stage, superseded document. As we submitted yesterday, the governing agreement was always that all work product, including any ancillary IP rights, was the sole property of the company. The document we provided memorializes this understanding." Marcus let him talk for a full 2 minutes. He let him build his flimsy case, referencing corporate bylaws and standard employment agreements, never once mentioning the actual registered copyright document. Then, Marcus signaled to the clerk, "Permission to share my screen, Your Honor." "Granted." Marcus clicked his mouse. The document Peterson had been vaguely alluding to, Their retroactive, forged agreement appeared on the main screen for all to see. Then, with another click, Marcus brought up the file's metadata in a window beside it. "Your Honors," Marcus began, his voice calm and dissecting. "As you can see, the document counsel for Evermore is referencing as the governing agreement was created yesterday afternoon at 4:15 p.m. It is an attempt to retroactively alter the legal reality of a federally registered copyright. It is not evidence, it is a confession." You could see the color drain from Peterson's face. He had walked directly into the trap. Judge Al-Hassani stared at the screen, her expression hardening. "Now," Marcus continued, his voice dropping slightly, "if I may present the actual governing document." He closed the window with their forgery and replaced it with my file. The original, the 2019 PDF, clean and clear. He clicked on the digital signature panel. The green check marks of authenticity bloomed on the screen. Signature valid. Source United States Patent and Trademark Office. Timestamp, July 17, 2019. "This," Marcus said, letting the word hang in the silent virtual courtroom, "is the document that was filed with your office. This is the legal instrument that established the ownership of this $19 million asset, and as you can see, under Section 4B, it requires the explicit, written consent of my client for any transfer of ownership, a consent that was never obtained." The second lawyer from Calder's firm, the one who hadn't spoken yet, suddenly unmuted himself. His name was Davies, and his voice was a low growl. He wasn't speaking to the judge. He was speaking directly to me. A clear act of intimidation. "Ms. Donahue," he said, his eyes boring into the camera. "Do you have any idea of the consequences of this action, of the tortious interference you are committing? Do you understand the damage you are causing to the good people who work at this company?" Before Marcus could object, I leaned forward into the microphone, my own voice quiet, but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "Yes, Mr. Davies," I replied, meeting his gaze through the screen. "I do. I wrote the clause." A profound silence fell over the hearing. My 7 words had vacuumed all the air out of the room. I hadn't just answered his question. I had asserted my ownership in a way no one could refute. I was not just a claimant. I was the architect. Marcus, seeing his opening, moved in for the kill. A high-resolution scan of the copyright registration certificate appeared on the screen. The official seal of the U.S. government gleaming in the corner. The line item for authorship was highlighted in yellow Evermore Licensing Solutions, Inc., Claire Donahue. The room was utterly still. The evidence was not just compelling, it was absolute. There was nothing left to argue. Judge Al-Hassani looked at the screen, then at the box containing Evermore's legal team. Her patience was clearly gone. She turned her gaze to Denise Calder's window. Her question was simple, direct, and brutal. "Ms. Calder," the judge said, her voice cutting through the tension, "I have just one question for you. Did Evermore Licensing Solutions obtain the explicit, written consent of Ms. Donahue before entering into the agreement to sell her co-owned intellectual property to Calder Systems? A simple yes or no will suffice." Every eye on the call swiveled to Denise's box. She sat frozen, a statue of crumbling arrogance. Her lawyers were silent. Her CFO was staring at his desk. She was alone. The digital clock on the screen ticked forward. 1 second, 2, 3 seconds of dead, damning air. Her jaw was clenched so tightly I could see the muscle jump. 4 seconds, 5. A lifetime passed in the space between heartbeats. Finally, a barely audible sound escaped her lips, a ghost of a word. No. That was it. That was all I needed to hear. The case was over. The deal was dead. Everything that came after was just paperwork. I glanced at Marcus, sitting beside me. He wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at me, and on his face was a smile. It was not a smile of happiness or relief. It was a smile as thin, as sharp, and as cold as a razor's edge. It was the smile of victory. The video conference ended not with a bang, but with a series of silent, Unceremonious clicks, one by one, the digital boxes containing the faces of our adversaries blinked out of existence, leaving only the seal of the Copyright Office on the screen before it too vanished, replaced by the neutral gray of Marcus's desktop. The hearing was over. We were left in the profound silence of the conference room, the hum of the air conditioning suddenly seeming loud and intrusive. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. He didn't look triumphant. He looked like a surgeon who had just completed a difficult but successful operation. The formal declaration from the panel should be issued within 24 hours, he said, his voice even. It will state the facts as presented, that you are a legal co-author of the copyright, and that no transfer is valid without your consent. They can appeal, but it's a fool's errand. They presented a fraudulent document to a federal panel. Their credibility is shot. So what happens now? I asked, my own voice sounding distant. The adrenaline of the confrontation was beginning to fade, leaving a strange, hollow calm in its wake. Now, he said, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked the sprawling city below. We wait. We've crippled their deal. We've legally invalidated their primary asset. They have two choices. Call Calder Systems and admit their $19 million company is built on a lie, killing the deal themselves, or they can try to deal with you. He turned from the window, a knowing look in his eyes. My money is on the latter. Denise Calder has too much ego to admit defeat to her buyers. She'll try to admit defeat to you first, thinking it's the cheaper option. He was right. It took an hour. I was gathering my things, preparing to leave, when my phone, lying face down on the polished mahogany table, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with a name I never thought I'd see there again. Denise Calder. It wasn't a blocked number or her office line. It was her personal cell phone, the last bastion of a desperate executive. I looked at Marcus. He simply nodded. A silent instruction. This is your kill. Take it. I let it ring 3 times before answering. A small assertion of control. I pressed the icon and lifted the phone to my ear, saying nothing. The silence stretched for a few seconds. I could hear her breathing, a shallow, unsteady sound. When she finally spoke, the smooth, confident cadence of the CEO was gone. In its place was a voice strained with a desperate, forced civility. Claire, she began, the single word sounding like a concession. Thank you for taking my call. I remained silent. I would not make this easy for her. Claire, she tried again, a note of pleading creeping in. That hearing, it was a disaster, a complete misunderstanding of the corporate structure, of how these things work. Things got out of hand. I think it's best if you and I, resolve this between ourselves, privately. She was trying to pull this back from the brink, to frame the legal demolition we had just witnessed as a simple spat between colleagues. She wanted to take it out of the hands of the lawyers and judges, back to a place where she believed her powers of manipulation and intimidation could still work. She wanted to make it personal. So I did. I cut through all her careful, face-saving preamble with a single, brutal question. How much? The question hung in the air between us, as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. There was a sharp intake of breath on her end of the line. She had likely prepared a whole speech, a carefully worded appeal to my reason or loyalty. I had just bypassed all of it. I had reduced her entire desperate position to the one thing it had always been about for her, a number. She stammered for a moment. It's not just about money. Claire, it's about the company, the employees, the future. How much? Denise, I repeated, my voice even softer, calmer, which only made the question more menacing. She finally relented, the word escaping her lips in a defeated sigh. 500,000, she said, rushing the words. We can have a check cut by the end of the day, $500,000. And of course, we would withdraw any intention to appeal the panel's decision. She presented the withdrawal of an appeal we would have easily won as if it were a valuable concession. It was a classic Denise move, but the number was the real tell. 50,000 had been an insult. $500,000 was an act of desperation. It was a huge sum of money, but it was still just a fraction. A rounding error on the grand prize she was about to lose. It was the price she thought my entire identity was worth. I let the silence stretch again, letting her stew in the inadequacy of her own offer. I walked over to the window and stood beside Marcus, looking down at the river of headlights flowing through the city streets at dusk. "Denise," I said finally, my voice conversational, almost curious. "Remind me, how much was Evermore being sold for?" I heard her flinch. It was a small, sharp sound, the noise of a direct hit. She had to know where this was going. She had to say the number, to admit the full scale of what was at stake, of what she was trying to protect. That's not relevant to this," she sputtered. "I think it is," I said gently. "What's the number?" Her response was choked, reluctant, laced with the bitterness of a queen being forced to state the value of her own crown to a peasant. 19 million. 19 million, I repeated, tasting the words. "Thank you for clarifying." I paused, letting the two numbers hang in the space between us, her offer of 500,000 and the kingdom worth 19 million she was trying to save. "The number you're offering is wrong. Denise, I'm not interested in a payoff." "Then what do you want?" she snapped, the civility finally cracking. "What's your price?" "It's not about a price," I replied, my voice still dangerously calm. "I'm just taking what was already mine." The implication landed with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't an extortionist. I was a reclaimer. I wasn't asking for a piece of her pie. I was telling her that I was a co-owner of the entire bakery. "You can't do this," she hissed, the desperation turning to venom. "You can't destroy the deal. Think of the jobs, the people who trusted you." It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to paint me as the villain, to burden me with a moral responsibility that was entirely her own. She had caused this, her greed, her arrogance, her carelessness. "I don't have to destroy the deal, Denise," I said, and the simplicity of the truth was the most powerful weapon I had. "I don't have to do anything at all. I just have to not sign." The trap had sprung. She was caught, not by my actions, but by her own. Her grand acquisition, her career-defining moment, her $19 million triumph was entirely dependent on a single stroke of my pen, a pen I had no intention of lifting. "You're tearing everything apart," she shouted, her voice trembling with the weight of fury and fear. It was the same warning she'd used before the last weapon of someone watching their power slip away. "You're ruining every connection, every shred of respect you've built. This is the end of your career." I looked out the window at the city lights, a sprawling galaxy of infinite possibilities. She saw my future as an ending, a scorched earth finale. But she was wrong. This wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, my beginning. A small smile touched my lips. "No, Denise," I said, my voice soft, almost a whisper, but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "I'm not destroying it. I'm rewriting it." I ended the call. The weekend passed in a state of suspended animation. The world was holding its breath, and I was holding it with it. I knew the fragile truce established by my refusal to sign couldn't last. A $19 million deal doesn't just evaporate, it implodes. The shockwave was coming. I spent 2 days in a self-imposed media blackout, letting the pressure build within the walls of Evermore and Caldor systems, letting their panic ripen. Monday morning arrived, gray and damp, the sky the color of old concrete. I made coffee and sat by my window, watching the city below grind into motion. I was waiting for the first tremor. 10:12. The tremor arrived as a forward from Marcus. It was not an email from Evermore or their lawyers. It was a press release, filed publicly with the SEC by Calder Systems. The language was cold, corporate, and utterly devastating. Calder Systems announced today that it has terminated its previously announced definitive agreement to acquire Evermore Licensing Solutions. The termination follows the discovery of a material misrepresentation in the warranty of title concerning the core intellectual property of the seller. Calder Systems will be seeking all available remedies under the terms of the agreement. Material misrepresentation. The words were a corporate death sentence. It wasn't just that the deal was off. Calder was publicly declaring that Evermore had lied, that they had attempted to sell a fraudulent asset. This wasn't a quiet breakup. It was a public execution. 10:15 a.m. My phone rang. The caller ID was a name I hadn't seen in 2 years. Julian Vance. He was a partner at a boutique venture capital firm that had led Evermore's seed round. He had been an early champion, a believer. His voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its usual smooth confidence, replaced by a high-pitched, frantic edge. Claire Julian Vance, for the love of God, tell me this press release is a mistake. Tell me your lawyer is just a bulldog who got off his leash. Hello, Julian, I said calmly. The press release is entirely accurate. Accurate, Claire. We just had a capital call. We're marking our Evermore holdings down to zero. Zero, our LPs are going to crucify us. Years of work, millions of dollars, up in smoke. What did she do? What did Denise do? She tried to sell something she didn't fully own. Julian, it's as simple as that. But the lawyers, the due diligence teams, how could they miss this? He pleaded. The question aimed at the universe, not me. They never thought to look, I said. They never thought to ask the person who wrote the contract. 10:52 a.m. My phone buzzed again. A text from my old colleague, Sam. All hands meeting, mandatory, conference room A. Denise looks like she's seen a ghost. Doors are being closed. Wish me luck. 40 minutes. In the time it takes to watch a sitcom, the entire financial foundation of Evermore had turned to dust. The valuation hadn't just dropped. It had ceased to exist. You cannot have a valuation when your only asset is legally untouchable. 11:30 a.m. Another text from Sam. She's blaming you. The whole thing. Stood up there and called you a disgruntled former legal counsel engaged in a campaign of corporate sabotage. Said you were exploiting a clerical loophole from the company's early days. She's trying to rally the troops. It's not working. People are just staring at her. We've all seen the Calder release. No one believes her. The classic tyrant's gambit. When the castle is falling, point to the witch in the woods and scream that it's her fault. But her magic was gone. The facts were already out there. 12:05 p.m. Marcus made his move. He sent out his own press release, a quiet, factual counterpoint to the noise and chaos. It was sent to every major financial news wire. It read, in response to inquiries regarding the termination of the Calder Systems Evermore acquisition, our client, Claire Donahue, has confirmed her legal status as co-author of the intellectual property in question, as registered with the United States Patent and Trademark Office in 2019. Ms. Donahue is the original architect of the Evermore licensing clause and has simply exercised her legal right to refuse consent for the transfer of her co-owned property. She is considering all available options to protect her intellectual property going forward. It was a masterpiece. It didn't accuse. It didn't attack. It just stated the undeniable truth, positioning me not as a saboteur, but as a creator protecting her work. It was a direct refutation of Denise's narrative, and it came with the implicit backing of the U.S. government. 1:30 p.m., the media calls began. The Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, TechCrunch. My phone lit up with unknown numbers from New York and San Francisco. I ignored them all, letting them go to voicemail. I had no desire to engage in a public brawl. My statement was Marcus's press release. But one reporter, a woman from a prominent financial outlet known for her deep-dive investigations, was persistent. She called 3 times. On the 3rd try, I answered. Claire Donahue, she asked, her voice sharp and professional. Yes. I'm sure you're swamped, but I have to ask. Denise Calder is on record blaming you for the collapse of this deal. Calder is claiming fraud. Your lawyer is claiming authorship. Do you have any comment on the situation at Evermore? I looked out my window. The name, the company, The whole ugly saga. It already felt like a memory, a story about someone else. What was there left to say? I don't comment on things that no longer exist, I said, and gently ended the call. 2:45 p.m. A call from Ben Carter, one of the original founders. He had been sidelined by Denise years ago, a powerless figurehead in the company he created. His voice was a strange mixture of shock and something that sounded like awe. "Claire," he said, "I'm in my car. I just left the building. It's a morgue in there. The investors are in full revolt. The board has been in an emergency video conference since noon. Julian Vance and the other seed investors are formally demanding Denise's immediate resignation. They're calling it gross negligence. They're holding her personally responsible for the loss of all shareholder value." "She is responsible," I said. "I know, God. I know. I never thought I'd see it actually happen. She was untouchable. You did it, Claire. You actually did it." 4:03 p.m. I was making tea when my phone buzzed with a news alert. It was a single, stark headline from the Associated Press. Evermore Licensing Solutions CEO Denise Calder resigns, effective immediately. I read the words. I set my phone down on the counter. The kettle began to whistle, a high, piercing shriek filling the silence of my apartment. The storm was over. The collapse was complete. There was no joy, no rush of vindictive pleasure. There was only the quiet, profound finality of a debt that had, at long last, been paid in full. After a storm of that magnitude, the silence that follows is the most profound. For a month, the world of Evermore Licensing Solutions simply ceased to exist. Its name was a toxic asset in the tech world, a cautionary tale told in hushed tones at industry mixers. The company itself was a ghost, its assets frozen, its employees scattered to the winds, its future a black hole of litigation and bankruptcy proceedings. I watched it all from a distance, a quiet observer of the crater I had created. I took no pleasure in the destruction, only a grim satisfaction in the balancing of the scales. The next chapter began, as the first had, with an email. This one was from the General Counsel of Calder Systems. The tone was markedly different from their previous communications. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a cool, pragmatic professionalism. They were no longer speaking to a nuisance. They were speaking to the sole proprietor of an asset they still desperately wanted. The email was a simple, formal request for a meeting to discuss a potential licensing agreement for the software formerly known as Evermore. The negotiations were handled entirely by Marcus. I was his silent partner. The queen on the chessboard he moved with lethal precision. The discussions were not about if they would license the software, but on what terms. Calder's lawyers tried to frame it as a standard deal, a new beginning. Marcus would gently, but firmly, remind them of the context. "Let's be clear," I heard him say during one conference call I listened to on mute. "You aren't licensing a product from a company. You are entering into an agreement with the product's creator. The previous deal was for an acquisition of a flawed entity. This is a licensing of a proven asset from its verified owner. The terms will reflect that reality." He was relentless. Every clause was scrutinized, every percentage point fought for. But on one point, he was immovable. It was the clause that defined the entire agreement, the one he insisted be on the very first page. He read it to me over the phone after a particularly grueling session with their legal team. The party of the first part, Calder Systems, acknowledges that the intellectual property, hereafter referred to as the software, is licensed from the party of the second part, Claire Donahue, as the sole and exclusive licensor. All rights, titles, and interests not explicitly granted herein are reserved by her, and her alone. Claire Donahue, sole licensor, I repeated, the words feeling foreign and powerful on my tongue. Marcus had not just won me a deal, he had legally, formally, and irrevocably reversed my erasure. The name they had tried to delete was now the only one on the contract that mattered. The final agreement was for a 10-year exclusive license. The total value of the contract, including upfront payments and guaranteed royalties, was $19.4 million. It was the original valuation of Evermore, plus a $400,000 tax for their hubris and my trouble. The signing was not a ceremony. It took place on a Tuesday afternoon in Marcus's quiet office. There were no cameras, no press releases, no celebratory champagne. There was only the heavy stock of the paper, the crisp black ink, and the quiet scratch of my pen as I signed my name over and over again. When it was done, Marcus simply nodded, took the documents, and sent them to the courier. Justice, I learned, doesn't always arrive with a thunderclap. Sometimes it arrives via FedEx on a Tuesday. In the weeks that followed, the aftershocks of Evermore's collapse continued to ripple. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at my apartment. The return address was a post office box, but I recognized the elegant, sharp handwriting immediately. It was from Denise. I held it in my hands for a long moment, feeling the weight of the paper. It was, I had no doubt, a letter of apology, a plea for understanding, an attempt to reframe her narrative, to salvage some piece of her shattered legacy. I thought about opening it, about reading the final words of the woman who had underestimated me so profoundly. Then I slid it, unopened, into a file box filled with old tax returns and bank statements. Her absolution was not mine to give, and her reasons were no longer relevant to my story. My inbox filled with messages from former colleagues. Most were LinkedIn requests, quiet acknowledgments of my new reality, but a few were more direct. "I don't know the whole story," one engineer wrote, "but I know what she was like. Thank you for having the courage to stand up." Another, from the marketing department, was even simpler. "You were right. They were small gestures, but they mattered. They were echoes of validation from the lives that had been churned by the collapse." The money, when it arrived, was an abstraction, a number on a screen too large to feel real. I used a small piece of it to do something that felt both practical and poetic. The sleek downtown office that had been Evermore's headquarters, the monument to Denise's ambition, had been vacated. The lease was broken, the assets liquidated. The building's owner, facing an empty flagship property, was eager to sell. I bought it, through a shell corporation, for pennies on the dollar. The day I walked into the lobby with the keys in my hand was overcast. The large glass doors that led into the main office space were bare. Mostly, a maintenance crew had been hired by the bank to scrub the branding, but they had done a hasty job. If you looked at the glass from the right angle, you could still see the ghost of the old logo, a faint, spectral outline of the word Evermore. The property manager asked me what I wanted on the new sign for the directory. I thought for a moment. I thought of the clause, the anchor, the single sentence that had held fast against the storm. "Clause 1, I said. "The name of the company is Clause 1. I told the cleaning crew to leave the glass on the main doors as it was. I wanted the ghost to remain. It was not a trophy, it was a reminder, a quiet, permanent testament to the fact that empires can fall, fortunes can be lost, and careers can be shattered, all because someone failed to read the fine print. There was no feeling of triumph, no soaring glee. There was only a deep, profound quiet, the kind of silence that settles over a battlefield after the fighting is done. It was the sound of justice, a sound you can only hear when everything else has gone still. I took the elevator to the third floor, the executive floor. I walked down the silent, carpeted hallway, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. It was the same hallway I had been escorted down a few months ago. A box of my belongings in my arms, I stopped at the polished reception desk outside what had once been Denise's corner office. From my pocket, I took out my old Evermore employee ID card, the one they had deactivated. My face, younger and more hopeful, stared up at me from the plastic. I placed it gently in the center of the reception desk, a small, forgotten artifact from a fallen civilization. Then I turned and walked away, not looking back. The corner conference room was a cathedral of light. The afternoon sun, a brilliant gold, streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the still air. It was the same room where Denise Calder had once held her triumphant executive meetings, The same room where she had plotted the company's trajectory and, inadvertently, her own demise. Now, it was mine. The long glass table was empty save for a single, leather-bound document placed squarely in the center of the largest sunbeam. The cover was embossed with two simple, elegant words, Calder Systems. I sat at the head of the table, not in a power posture, but simply as an observer, watching the light play across the pages within. This was my copy of the licensing agreement. My name, Claire Donahue, appeared 57 times within its 80 pages. On the first page, it was defined as licensor. On the last page, it was an elegant, final signature. My phone, resting beside the contract, vibrated against the cool glass. The screen lit up with Marcus's name. I answered. "It's done," he said. There was no preamble. His voice was calm, professional, the sound of a closing ledger. "The initial wire transfer was confirmed by the bank 1 minute ago. The funds are in your account." "Thank you, Marcus," I said, "for everything." "It was a pleasure, Claire," he replied, and for the first time, I heard a genuine warmth in his voice. "Some cases are about money. This one was about poetry." We ended the call. I picked up my phone, my fingers steady as I navigated to my bank's mobile application. I logged in, the screen loaded, and the numbers appeared. At the top of the page, under total balance, was a figure that seemed to defy the dimensions of the small screen. $19,400,000. I stared at the number, at the long, elegant string of zeros that followed the 19. It wasn't just money, it was a symbol. It was the precise sum of their ambition, the exact measure of their greed. It was the price they had placed on my erasure, and now it was the foundation of my new beginning. I felt no jolt of excitement, no giddy rush. I felt only a profound sense of equilibrium, as if a great, unbalanced scale had finally, after years of being tilted against me, settled into perfect, level harmony. I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the street 3 stories below. Across the way, a team of workers on a scaffold were putting the finishing touches on the new sign above the building's main entrance. Brushed aluminum letters, clean and modern, gleamed in the sun. They spelled out the 2 words I had chosen. Clause 1, licensing. The door to the conference room opened softly. It was my new assistant, a bright young woman named Amelia. She had the earnest, organized air of someone who believed in the power of a well-managed calendar. She had no idea she was working in the epicenter of a corporate earthquake. To her, this was just an exciting new company. "Ms. Donahue," she said quietly. "The reporter from the Business Chronicle is in the lobby. She's very persistent. She asks if you might have a statement for her, now that the Calder deal is public." A statement. They wanted words, a soundbite, a victory speech. They wanted me to crow, to gloat, to perform for the cameras and give them a tidy, dramatic narrative. They wanted the final scene of the movie, where the hero tells the world how they won. I turned from the window, a small, quiet smile touching my lips. "No, thank you, Amelia," I said. "Tell her I have nothing more to say." I gestured to the contract lying on the table, its pages glowing in the afternoon light. I already said everything I needed to in the clause. Later that evening, in my apartment, I did something I hadn't done since the collapse. I turned on the financial news network. I was curious to see the final, pathetic postscript to the story of Denise Calder. I didn't have to wait long. There she was, in a recorded interview, not in a studio, but in what looked like a library in a private home. The regal posture was gone. She was slumped in a leather armchair, her expensive suit looking a size too big for her diminished frame. The makeup couldn't hide the dark, bruised circles under her eyes. The confidence had been replaced by a brittle, weary defensiveness. The interviewer was gentle, almost pitying. "In retrospect, Ms. Calder," he asked, "what was the critical mistake at Evermore?" Denise looked down at her hands, then up at a point somewhere past the camera. A long, hollow sigh escaped her lips. "We had a brilliant product," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "We had a brilliant team. Our mistake. Our mistake was that we fundamentally misjudged someone, we underestimated them, and we paid the price. We misjudged someone, that was her final narrative. Not, I committed fraud, not, my arrogance blinded me, just a vague, passive admission of a poor character assessment. It was the most honesty I believed her capable of. And it was still a lie. I picked up the remote control and pressed the power button. The screen went black, silencing her voice forever. I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. The apartment was still. There were no congratulatory calls, no celebratory text messages, no ringing endorsements of my victory. There was no need for them. My reward wasn't the sound of applause. It was this perfect, unbroken, and exquisitely sweet quiet. They had pushed me out the door with nothing. They had left me with empty hands and a future scrubbed clean. And in the end, they were the ones left with the shell of a company they had built, the brand they had polished, the employees they had hired, the future they had so arrogantly planned. They had everything they had ever wanted, except the right to use it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'm curious. Where in the world are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments below so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a thumbs up, and hitting that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.